may notice from your agenda that our participants have changed a little bit, but I think you'll find that this young group will be a good setting from what we've heard already. I'd like to introduce to you now the moderator of this panel, Colonel Nathan Hill. Colonel Hill is Air Combat Command Operations Division Chief, who's responsible for organizing the past 3 weapons and tactics conferences. He will introduce the panel members. Colonel Hill.
Thank you, sir. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the last panel before lunch. So hopefully you'll still have some attention span left. So I think you'll find by the end of this session that this WEPTAC panel is a great panel, a great topic to have for this AFA symposium. And hopefully you'll discover why by the time this is over. What's happened with WEPTAC over the last 6 to 8 years, I think, has been quite a transformation, quite an evolution. These gentlemen here to my left will explain exactly what WEPTAC is here soon, but what they probably won't say is, because they're probably too humble to say it, is that WEPTAC has become, at least the CAF WEPTAC, has become a cornerstone for our CAF. It may even be a cornerstone for our Air Force. We meet once a year, and it is the funneling point for all the tactics that we do for the CAF, for all the airframes and for all the weapon systems out there. Over the last 6 to 8 years, the interest in WEPTAC and the importance of WEPTAC, I think, has grown. The importance, of course, is to all the operators, from the youngest to the oldest. But the interest is for folks both in the Air Force and outside the Air Force. Evidence of that is the number of GOs that participate. In the first 3 rows of our 2 days of outbriefs, there was over 40 general officers there the last couple of years. And they're not just from the combat air forces, they're from outside the combat air forces as well. So if you're in the crowd and you're familiar with WEPTAC and you've been to one, but it's been more than about 8 years, then I would suggest to you that you're going to find this both relevant and interesting this next 40 minutes. If you're out in the crowd and you have no idea what WEPTAC is, you'll also find it relevant and interesting, but hopefully informative, and so you understand what WEPTAC is. I think you'll also find that the majority of the people in the audience have some kind of touch point with WEPTAC. If not with WEPTAC, at least with the outputs of WEPTAC. And I think that'll be especially true for industry partners. So without further ado, what I intend to do is introduce the members of the panel, and then they're going to have a few minutes of introductory comments, and then we should have 20 to 25 minutes of time for questions. So please start filling out your cards and sending them up. I should also mention that everyone on the panel to my left is a graduate of the Weapons Instructor course. So by default, you're looking at the best and brightest and the most knowledgeable folks that we have in our Air Force. The first one I'll introduce is Lieutenant Colonel Ronnie Hawkins. He was our WEPTAC chair this year, our overall chair. And the process of getting the chair starts literally a year in advance. He was in charge of the WEPTAC the prior year, and during that whole time he took notes on how to run a WEPTAC and, more importantly, how to improve a WEPTAC. And then over the next 12 months, then he spent time getting the processes in place, getting his team in place, and then making sure all the events that lead up to a WEPTAC, which are significant, are all in place. And then during the WEPTAC, he's in charge of everything, being the chair, from the donuts to the security badges, and to make sure that the products are relevant and that they're quality products that are released. To his left is Major Carroll Phelps. His call sign is Phelps. Kendrick is his real name. And he was on the panel this year as well, and he is being groomed for next year's WEPTAC, so he'll be running the show next year. His particular job this year was to be the MAWG chairman. So MAWG stands for Mission Aviation Working Group, and you'll find, we'll talk more about that in a second as far as what the details of that are. But there was 5 MAWGs that meet the first week of WEPTAC, and he was in charge of making sure those run efficiently. The 2 gentlemen to his left were 2 of our MAWG leads, and they started their preparation several months in advance. We handpicked these leads, and then they deal with a certain topic, and they will introduce their topic when they have their opening remarks, as well as some of the discussion that takes place, that took place during their MAWGs, as well as some of the output that took place. And that's Michael Kingry, if you could raise your hand, please, and Tyson Wetzel. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie Zog Hawkins.
Well, good morning, and thank you again for the opportunity to come here and talk to you about WEPTAC. We did put together some slides real quick to just run those of you through in the room who have not seen a WEPTAC or haven't, as Colonel Hill alluded to, been to one in a few years. So if you'll just bear with us, we'll jump through the slides, and then I'll hand it over, and we'll get to your questions here shortly. So there's our standard slide of what we'll talk about. So what is WEPTAC? The WEPTAC stands for Weapons and Tactics Conference. It is also run in conjunction with the annual Tactics Review Board that it is governed by AFI, required on an annual basis. But really what it is it is an opportunity for the weapons officers and the folks that run the weapons and tactics shops throughout the CAF to get together on an annual basis and bring up issues that are affecting them in their operational theaters, and we can work towards finding tactical solutions to these problems that therefore will move their way through from the tactical level to the operational level and ultimately even to the strategic level. We also provide a forum for these tactical experts to get together and to discuss issues that are focused in on a particular work group. So we started out very focused on just an individual MDS, and it has grown significantly since then to encompass not just airframes, but different types of systems that work, like the AOC, for example, as its own MDS. And then we really give them an opportunity to get together and to get through some of the problems and then present those problems in a very focused outbrief session with leadership. And it provides the tactical level warfighter an opportunity to speak to leadership and say, sir, ma'am, here are the things that we see at the tactical level that are issues with your Air Force that we need to address, and here are solutions for that. We're very much focused on non-material solutions. The idea there, and something that we do when we have chairman training for the individual work group leads, is to provide them the knowledge that, hey, we're trying to fix with what we've got. We don't need to go out there and say, let's build this magic widget, which would be great to have, but that's not necessarily going to solve the problem in the short term. So we really are focused a little bit more in the, call it the 2 to 3 year range, and we're focusing on fighting the fight with what we have right now. For this year, the 2015 WEPTAC that we had in January, the theme was tactical cross-domain integration, maximizing operational effects. And what we were looking to drive home to both the participants and those who showed up for the outbrief in the second week was the idea that even when you're doing stuff at the tactical level, it has impacts beyond just your cockpit, beyond just your terminal, beyond just that switch actuation. Can have significant impacts at the operational level. And so we wanted to focus the participants in that area and make sure that they were working their problem sets towards achieving that goal. We set objectives for both the MAWGs, the mission area working groups, as well as the Tactics Review Board. And I'll let Phelps speak specifically to the MAWGs, but ultimately those are designed to answer problem sets from around the CAF that are submitted by the CNAFs and MAJCOM commanders. And then the second week, we have the Tactics Review Board where we're really focusing in on the MDS, the individual MDS themselves. Overall, the history of WEPTAC, we've grown. It started in its current form, if you will, back in about 2012, but long before that, in the early 2000s, it was very fighter-bomber centric. You would usually have about 200 participants, and then because there was so much good work being done, there was goodness coming out of it, it grew, and it grew significantly to the point where in 2011, there were a little over 1,300 participants. And we were told, hey, that's way too many people going out there. There's obviously the optics of people going out to, we have it at Nellis because it is the only base in the CAF that is capable of handling that many people. But there are the obvious optics of, hey, we're all going out to Vegas. So we were directed by General Goldfein, who was the A3 at the time, to really skinny this down and get it down to just the folks that need to be there, handling and tackling the problems that need to be solved. And so we readdressed, refocused for the 2012 and 2013, had it just for the MDS working groups and as well as 5 MAWGs. And then in 2014, we had, or 2013 and 2014, we introduced core function work groups. So all of the individual MDSs are nested under their core functions. So for the CAF, that's all 5 at ACC as well as the Global Strike core function of nuclear deterrence operations. So we had our 6 core function work groups as well. And you see we had between 425 and 450 participants over the last 3 to 4 years there at WEPTAC. That's what our schedule looked like while we were out there. The first week we did the missionary work groups, which you'll get a little bit more information on here in a second. And then the second week we did the Tactics Review Board, MDS work groups, as well as the core function. And then in the last 2 days is when we have our outbriefs. So we outbrief the TRB stuff, and then outbrief the MAWG outbriefs as well on Thursday and Friday of the last week. And it's important that we flow things the way we do, because the mission area work groups will come up with issues that need a solution that they will then funnel to the second week groups. Maybe it's a potential issue for Strike Eagles, and they will hand that problem set, if you will, to the Strike Eagle chairman and say, you got to fix this for us, and then they will build that rack and stack. But ultimately, all this builds towards designing the test priority list for the following year. So this year we're working on the FY16 rack and stack for the test priority list. And what basically happens throughout the year is at the tactical squadron group and wing level, we get submissions throughout the year of identifying a problem. And so long as it's not a hardware solution, like we need to buy something or we need a new radio or something like that, then we'll take it down the process on the left-hand side that you see before you, where it's a TTP issue that we want to develop. The squadron groups and wings will have their own tactics review board, and they will validate that this is in fact a TTP that needs to be addressed. It goes through the MAGCOM, it comes to us at ACC, Weapons and Tactics, and then we push it to the CAF, WEPTAC, and TRB. Out of that, there are usually two solutions. One, it is suitable to test, and so we will put it on the test priority list for the next year. Or no, it's not, but it may still be something that needs to be addressed, and so we will push it to a flash bulletin or a white paper, weapons school paper, or something along those lines. Maybe it's an adjustment that needs to be made there. As far as 2015 WEPTAC was concerned, we had, when it was all said and done, about 600 participants in 40 different work groups. We had 68 tactics improvement proposals that we ultimately did push to test for the test priority list for FY16, and that was out of a total of about 160 tactics improvement proposals that came to us. Again, the multi-domain integration was the focus, or cross-domain integration was the focus, specifically in the MAWGs. And then we had our first joint MAWG this year, where we were very intentional about inviting our joint partners out there, the Army and the Navy, and we even went so far as to pay for a few of their subject matter experts to show up and participate in the MAWGs so that they could provide their knowledge and expertise to help us fully solve the situation. And I'll turn it over to Major Carroll for the MAWG process.
Good morning. Let me add my gratitude and appreciation for allowing us to come out and share some thoughts and some outputs as far as the WEPTAC process. As you saw in the previous slides, there was 2 weeks. During the first week, I essentially organized the MAWG Mission Area Working Group Chairman. We had, the way that process started, about 180 days out from WEPTAC execution. We sent a message out to all the component number Air Force commanders and asked them simply, what is your biggest problem? We're going to have an opportunity to get the best and brightest minds in the Air Force into the same room, and we're going to take an attempt to solving those problems using the non-material solutions that we have. So we got 9 submissions, and then we vetted those internally within the A3TW shop, and then ultimately up to the ACC A3 for approval, and then from there, we went to the weapons school intentionally because, again, with the expertise and the backgrounds of all the experts out there in the different major weapon systems represented at the weapons school, those are what we found over the history of the WEPTAC process is to be the most viable candidates as far as having the ability to, one, herd the cats, for lack of a better term, in leading the missionary working groups, and having the expertise and the subject matter expertise in the background. As I already alluded to, we had some joint participants for this one, and what we did, we intentionally organized a multi-domain or integration scorecard, which essentially graded our ability to integrate all of the domains, or cross-domain, if you will, not just making sure that all domains are represented, but actually implemented into the planning and the process, and more importantly, into the solutions. And we identify the appropriate gaps if there were, either because of the lack of capability, lack of representation, or the ability to actually, because of maybe classification issues, to integrate that domain's capability into the problem set. My guidance to all of the MAWG chairmen was to build those non-material solutions, because the intent is, after all of this is done, as you saw in week 2 is the TRB, of the Tactics Review Board process, is to get the solutions that come out of the week 1s, out of the MAWGs, immediately either into those TRB if they need to be tested, or more importantly, into the, back to the CNAPs that submitted the problem sets initially. I also asked them to go one step further, and I said, give me one slide that says, these are my technology gaps. If I could talk to industry reps on a one-on-one basis, what would I ask them for? So that we could kind of hedge our bets as to what we could get out of the industry reps, and we can identify what material solutions we need, and more importantly, how we would implement those, integrate those solutions into the plans that we develop over the first week of WEPTAC. As you've heard in previous panels, the Air Force and our coalition being able to fight tonight, if you will, in an integrated environment, both from all of the domains as well as our coalition partners, that's going to be critical. And that was part of my guidance to my MAWG chairmen, to ensure that whatever plans they came up with were releasable through those coalition partners, so that we didn't have to fight that releasability issue during the onset of the TTPs, or more importantly, if we went to implement these TTPs in any CNAF conflict. We had significant help from all the foreign disclosure officers, from all of the MAGCOMs, and a lot of the action items and the tips or tactics improvement proposals aided into the week 2's TRB process. And with that, I will hand it over to 2 of the MAWG chairmen and let them talk to some of their findings and challenges as well as the solutions in their processes. We had 5 MAWGs. Sorry. They had 5 MAWGs, 2 of which are represented here. We've got the modern long-range SAM takedown. You can see Major Wetzel from the 19th intelligence background there, executing a kill chain against naval threats. That was Major Select Olger Thomas from the 8th Weapons Squadron. He's an RJ background. Integrated MALD deployment, that was Major Trigger Tileston from the 608th. He's a Global Strike Command B-52 background. Integrated Air Missile Defense Shot Prioritization, again, that was Major Mongo Dietrich from the 433rd. He's an F-22 background. And finally, the non-traditional assisted recovery in the CDO environment, that's from 9th Air Force submitted, and that's Major Mongo Kingry from the 34th Weapons Squadron. And he will talk through now some of his solutions and challenges for his submission and working group.
Good morning. I'm Major Mike Kingry, go by Mongo. I'm a HH-60 instructor pilot in the 34th Weapons Squadron at Nellis Air Force Base there at the Weapons School. I was the chairman for the PR in a contested, degraded, operationally limited environment. The problem set that was offered to us and that was posed to us is that as adversary nations continue to increase the sophistication of their IADs, we see a corresponding increase in the likelihood for an isolating event. With that corresponding increase, we also see an increase in the likelihood and the probability for a prolonged evasion scenario for any of our objectives on the ground. In order to scope this problem for PR in a CDO environment, we made a couple of assumptions as far as enemy capabilities as well as friendly capabilities. For the enemy capabilities, the solutions we developed were all country agnostic and rather generic, but what we did assume was that the forces we'd be facing would be battalion-sized regular forces with all the associated small arms, man-pad, and ADA. We also assessed that they would have modern long-range SAMs that a Guerrilla will talk about during his MAWG, also a 4th-gen fighter capability, in addition to having widespread GPS and comm jamming. Finally, we assessed that they would have dedicated counter-CSAR teams that train specifically for the capture and exploitation of isolated personnel. As far as our friendly forces, we assumed it'd be a U.S. objective on the ground, and if he was evading on the ground, it'd be a minimum of a 14-day evasion period in this highly contested environment. Additionally, we assumed that there'd be a hostile civilian population in and around the objective, and that also there'd be a NAR mechanism in place in order to facilitate his recovery. Just for the education of the group, NAR stands for Non-Conventional Assisted Recovery. It's essentially personal recovery conducted by indigenous or surrogate forces that have been trained by our special forces or by other government agencies. So it's actual physical human beings, human assets, indigenous personnel who are trained by our special forces. They're cultivated, grown by our special forces for the express purpose of personal recovery in some of these highly contested environments. As we stepped through the MAWG, some of the recommendations we made kind of fell into 2 broad categories. One being how we improve our training in order to prepare potential isolated personnel for a prolonged evasion, and then also how we increase their the IP survivability in that contested environment. The first recommendation we came up with was developing TTPs and determining aircrew survival equipment gaps in regards to long-term evasion. What we found was we had no validated test data in regards to sustenance requirements, evasion, or operation of the C-cell, which is our survival radio program of record, in a contested environment for a prolonged evasion period. So we simply recommended conducting a test there in order to gain those TTPs through validated test data. We also advocated and recommended tailoring our periodic SEER training to be specific for specific AOs and platforms. Particularly what that looks like is that for our SEER refresher training and also our pre-deployment high risk of isolation training, making sure we're focusing on long-term evasion, recovery by a NAR mechanism, and also operation of the C-cell in a CDO environment for our assets that are most likely to find themselves in this prolonged evasion scenario, namely our 5th gen and LO assets. The next two bullets and the next recommendations we came up with, while the Air Force is designating a new Sandy 1 to be the torchbearer for all things PR, we wanted to really focus on increasing the entire CAS capability in regards to PR proficiency. One of the ways we're tackling this is through the creation of what we call the Personnel Recovery Officer, or the PRO, at the unit level. What the PRO would be is essentially an individual who's a squadron SME, squadron expert in all things regarding personnel recovery. So they would be the expert on how their particular MDS leverages their unique capabilities in order to perform during a PR event. We're advocating this similar in construct to the ECO or ECP program, so Electronic Combat Officer or Electronic Combat Pilot in a rescue or fighter squadron. We're not only advocating this for our flying units, but also for our space and cyber units or anyone who leverages any kind of support during a PR event. In that same vein, we're also recommending enhanced on-scene commander training. So the overall goal here is to try to move PR from a mindset where it's a second or third level contingency and move it into a well-practiced skill set that we regularly train for. Other things that we brought up was we looked at existing technologies we have in the RPA realm as well as in the precision airdrop realm in order to repurpose those technologies for the application of IP resupply in a CDO environment. A common theme throughout a lot of the missionary working groups was the incorporation of MAWG into our mission training, also our mission planning and mission execution, and we also advocated for the development of MAWG TTPs in support of personnel recovery. And then finally, and most importantly, what we recommended was that we send a demand signal to the geographic combatant commanders that we need an increased NAR capability in many of these contested areas which we may find ourselves in the future. As Phelps alluded to earlier, we also, as we step through our MAWG, we also identified some technology gaps that we're looking to solve with essentially material solutions. The first one we came up with was the handheld C-cell interrogator. Essentially, it's a multi-MDS handheld interrogation device that will allow the aircrew to interrogate a C-cell radio and get back precise location information as well as objective status, and allow for discrete two-way text messaging without having to reach all the way back to the PRCC or the JPRC at the AOC or KOC respectively. We also advocated for the development of isolated personnel mission planning systems to be developed. So what we envisioned here was essentially a tablet or a smartphone type device which the objective could carry with them. It would have extensive map data on it, also the ability for real-time threat updates to help him plan his evasion route for a 14-day evasion period. It would essentially have applications on the device as well for food and water procurement, as well as self-aid buddy care. Other technology gaps that we addressed were the need for a next-generation signaling device that could be seen by our ISR assets at range during a CDO conflict. And then we also advocated for search area reduction software to be used in the JPRC and PRCC. The final technology gap that we addressed and what we're advocating for is for false IP beacons. So in the CSAR community, we typically train to counter CSAR forces attempting to lure us into ambushes using a false IP location. And we found we lack the equivalent capability to do that to the enemy. So what we're advocating for is essentially a false IP beacon that would mimic a lot of our transmissions for survivors, whether they be radio or beacons, and essentially create confusion amongst those counter CSAR forces, ultimately buying our isolated personnel time on the ground to prolong their evasion and increase their chances for recovery. That's just a quick wrap-up of what some of the highlights of what we hit during our MAWG, and with that, I'll turn it over to Gorilla.
Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Tyson Wetzel, go by Gorilla. I'm an intelligence and threat instructor at the weapons school. I was in charge of looking at modern long-range SAMs. what has traditionally been known as double-digit SAMs, or historically known as double-digit SAMs. We wanted to expand the focus and not just look at these SAMs, but also how to operate an advanced integrated air defense system, or IADS. Now, this is not a new problem. We've been looking at this for over a decade. However, as we start to shift from COIN to more contested operations, the importance of this mission set has increased. Additionally, the threat we're facing, as has already been mentioned in a couple of discussions earlier this morning, is also advancing at a very significant rate. Surface-to-air missiles now deployed in numerous nations around the globe can engage targets at ranges greater than 100 nautical miles. They have a claimed capability to engage low observable aircraft, cruise missiles, and precision-guided weapons. Targeting these SAMs have become much more difficult as nations have focused on rapid mobility with their SAMs, advanced denial and deception techniques, and jamming throughout the spectrum to include communications and data links, imagery sensors and radar, and GPS. So we were tasked to develop a game plan for how we would operate in and take down these modern long-range SAMs. We looked at a couple of different tactics, and like I mentioned, these aren't revolutionary tactics. Airmen have been looking at this type of problem for quite a while. We used the find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess, or F2T2 EA methodology, and overlaid that onto a threat representative location. We looked at employment considerations that would enable our Blue Force success while mitigating the risk to the airmen, and we identified the need to codify these tactics in integrated manuals that all airmen can access and study. Our working group was truly joint and combined in nature. We had Air Force, Navy, and Army and Royal Air Force participants, including aircrew, intelligence, command and control, space, and cyber subject matter experts, representing virtually every aircraft and combat specialty in the Air Force. We identified 5 recommendations for improving the F2T2 EA process specific to the modern long-range SAM problem. First, we identified the need to improve our ability to F2T. Finding, fixing, and tracking modern long-range SAMs is extremely difficult at the type of extended ranges that our C2ISR constellation has been forced into. Cross-domain collection utilizing air, space, and cyberspace assets is critical, and we need some form of a fusion center that will rapidly fuse all this collected data and develop timely and actionable intelligence that can be used to dynamically target these SAMs. Second, we need to improve the engagement capability against these modern long-range SAMs. The target and engagement of these SAMs has become more difficult as the ranges have increased, and the engagement capability of these SAMs against our weapons has improved. We are now dependent on survivable, low observable bombers, fighters, and weapons to successfully engage these modern long-range SAMs. However, our conventional forces are even more critical now as they are a force enabler to improve the survivability of these LO aircraft and weapons. Non-kinetic effects and less survivable weapons should be force packaged with whatever we determine as our primary kill mechanism to increase the chances some of those weapons get to their intended targets. Third, we identified the need for a new BDA mentality. Assessing the effectiveness of our attacks on these SAMs must be conducted quickly and balance probability with risk recommendations to our force commander. Our current battle damage assessment, or BDA process, relies too much on high-resolution images of a system broken in two. This is often a time-consuming process. What we advocate is moving to a more dynamic BDA process that will enable the dynamic targeting and retargeting process. We need to be willing to take an elevated risk if we have multiple indications that these SAMs have likely been destroyed. BDA should be looked at as a way of providing the JFAC or the CFAC with a weighted argument of probability of destruction versus the risk recommendation for the risk that the commander should make. Fourth, training to the A2AD environment must be reinvigorated. We identified the need to train to a more advanced and threat representative scenario. Unfortunately, we can't represent the type of threat we're talking about even at the Nevada Test and Training Range, clearly the greatest air power training facility in the world. What we looked at is live, virtual, and constructed as presenting potentially the best opportunity to train to this type of threat that we're talking about. As an example, future red flags and weapons school integration missions could include a virtual portion of a mission or VOL that attacks and takes down the preponderance of these types of SAMs, while the live fly portion of the mission attacks the remaining long-range SAMs and the shorter-range SAMs and centers of gravity that remain inside the IADS. Finally, this evolution in tactics will only buy us time. As the threat advances, we need a new generation of weapon systems that are developed from the start to attack this type of A2AD problem. So what I've talked to you about is the non-material solutions, but in terms of the material solution realm, we need longer range, faster, and more survivable weapons and weapon systems, and that is required to mitigate the risk to our forces. So we took what we thought were critical, low or no cost initial steps to solve this problem. We developed a concept of operations for modern long-range SAM takedown, and that'll be published in our next issue of the Weapon School's Weapons Review. We have taken those integrated multi-domain solutions and we'll be placing those into Air Force tactics, techniques, and procedures documents, as well as joint tactics manuals. At the Weapon School in Red Flag, we are revolutionizing the training scenarios that we are presenting to Blue Forces to reflect this higher-end threat. The next step after these types of actions is to increase the training opportunities via meaningful investment in the NTTR to improve the type of threat that we can train against in the live-fly environment. We need to realize the promise of LVC training and the development of the new generation of aircraft and weapon systems that will mitigate the risk to our airmen. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Well, hopefully out in the crowd up to this point, you've realized a couple things. One is that these are some pretty smart individuals up here. And two is that a lot of the stuff that they do there at the WEPTAC that we've talked about ties into a lot of things that have already been talked about this morning. Personnel recovery in a contested environment for sure, all kinds of command and control, how the AOCs and all the distributed control, all those discussions, long-range strike and long-range bombers, long-range bombs, et cetera. And of course cyber. All those things and more are talked about at this WEPTAC. And we, of course, focus on the tactical portion of it, but like our theme was this year, we wanted to expand it and make it more operational. We had some good discussions before the WEPTAC started on how any airman doing any tactic, especially if he's over a foreign country dropping some high explosive bomb, can suddenly become operational or even strategic. If he takes out, say, a country's leader with one bomb, that's a pretty strategic event that he's had happen. All right, well, keep your questions coming in, and I'll go ahead and start. The first one, I think, is a pretty easy softball. This is for Zog Hawkins. Zog, do you need to be a weapons officer to contribute to the Weapons and Tactics Conference?
The answer to that is no. We have had numerous tactics improvement proposals that have come in from across the CAF. And usually what you see at the very beginning is a very rough outline of we have identified a problem. Maybe there's a better way to do this, or maybe we don't know what the better way is. So I'm an MQ1 and 9 weapons officer. One of the things that came in from my community this year was in the MQ9 there is a drift cutout setting, so where you can drop laser guided bombs in a crosswind, but we don't know how accurate it is. And so one of our young captains, who is not a weapons officer but an inspiring instructor, said, "Hey, we need to figure this out, or we should just not use it." And so he submitted that as a tip that came in, and it wound its way in, and it ended up being one of the 68 that we pushed to test. So you do not need to be a weapons officer. You do need to know who the person who's running your weapon shop is, because that's where you started at the very grassroots level.
Okay, and they have a follow-on question. What about for line officers and enlisted? Are they able to participate in WEPTAC? And I will add on this, can you explain the by invite only portion of WEPTAC?
So for the participation in WEPTAC, one of the things that we were tasked to do in the last couple of years was to make sure that we were being good stewards of the TDY funds for both the taxpayer and the wing commanders, because the wing commanders are ultimately the ones that are having to release the funds to send folks TDY for sometimes 2 weeks if they're going to be at the entire WEPTAC to participate. So we tried to do that as an invite-only kind of thing, where you would submit and say, "Hey, I wanted to go to WEPTAC because I'm a subject matter expert in X, Y, or Z," and then the work group chairman had an opportunity to give a kind of the thumbs up or thumbs down on, yes, we need more of these folks, or we don't have any of these folks, or I've got too many of these folks, and so I don't necessarily need this person. And so we were trying to make sure that we didn't have too many cooks in the kitchen is really what it boiled down to. When it was all said and done, though, we were right-sized, I would think, for where we've been in the last couple of years in terms of the number of participants that we had. And it was not just officers, it was not just pilots, it was basically crew members from all of the individual MDSs, their crew positions that had tactical inputs, as well as folks who, aren't necessarily flyers. The intel community has a huge play under the Global Integrated ISR Core Functional Work Group. There's a lot of folks that are not officers, not rated, that are bringing significant subject matter expertise to bear at WEPTAC. And so you don't have to be an officer, you don't have to necessarily be line pilot X or Y, but you can participate in WEPTAC through that means.
Okay, next question is also for Zog. Has ACC considered releasing WEPTAC outbrief results to industry partners?
We have all of the briefs ready to go, and next week we'll be sending out an email message traffic, not unlike what we normally send out to the CAF and beyond, that says here's what we did. And basically what it's going to be is there's going to be some links to where all the information that we outbriefed on Thursday and Friday will be hung on a SharePoint type site where you can go and access it. From an industry perspective, we don't necessarily release everything to industry. We will take requests for that, and then we have to run that through leadership to make sure it is approved. We don't want to get into any issues or trouble with providing unfair advantage or anything like that. But we do make sure that the industry partners have an opportunity. There's an industry night at WEPTAC. There's actually 2 industry nights at WEPTAC, or during WEPTAC, where industry can come and provide valuable input to what's going on in the process. They can let the warfighters know what they're working on, and they can also get input from the warfighters there. So that's where we really see the bulk of the crosstalk between the tactical warfighter and industry is at industry night.
Okay. The next question is for the MAWG chair or the MAWG leaders. It's actually a 2-part question. I'll answer the first one real quickly. During the outbriefs, is there any Q&A or discussion? The short answer is yes, there is Q&A time. So the second part of the question is, can you describe the interaction and the types of questions and or comments that you get from the audience? So any of our MAWG folks, if you could answer that.
Well, one thing that I think we all thought was pretty beneficial was this was an opportunity for relatively young officers that are still down at the tactical level to have interaction with a lot of general officers and decision makers. And so a lot of the questions we got was how some of the tactics that have been tried and true for a while, how those will work in a more degraded environment or a more denied environment. So we were able to, to use the old phrase, talk truth to power. So we were able to tell the generals where there were potentially some issues with our tactics, where we could solve it through a non-material solution, and where we were really just running out of the ability to solve those problems until we made a material type of improvement. So I would say that the biggest interaction was with the general officers in the front row, and being able to answer some of their questions as to what their force structure currently would be able to do against these types of threats.
I also think that's pretty important to have. The opportunity as a tactical level expert to have that unfiltered communication with some of the decision makers is definitely a huge benefit of WEPTAC. So we get 30 to 40 of the experts in a room kind of locking them together for 4 or 5 days and develop these solutions, and then kind of unfiltered be able to talk to the decision makers is a huge asset, I know, for a lot of our communities.
All right, I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. This one is probably for Zog, but anybody can answer that. How are the WEPTAC suggestions made real? Who adopts them and how?
So for the TRB portion of WEPTAC, that is all, like I mentioned earlier, it's AFI driven, and there is very specific timelines that we have to meet in order to build the test priority list for the next fiscal year. In fact, they're going through many of those machinations right now back at ACC in order to get the FY16 TPL ready for the street so that the test community can go out and execute it. For the MAWGs, something that we've developed over the last few years is the ability to track all of the different action items and tips that were produced by the MAWGs and make sure that those things are being implemented. When they are outbriefed, the MAWG chairman basically they are talking to the larger audience, but they are in fact talking to the CNAF who submitted that problem set originally and said, boss, here's what we came up with to address the problem that you gave us. We in turn hand all that information and all those suggestions all those recommendations over to a particular POC who's already been designated from that CNAF or MAGCOM. And I say we, now I'm talking about Weapons and Tactics Shop at ACC. We stay in pretty constant contact with them throughout the year at some regularly scheduled times and intervals to kind of assess, hey, have you taken these steps? Have they been implemented? What's been the outcome of them? We had some in years past that were implemented within a week, where the CNAF said, that's a great idea, and they went back, and the next week there were spins changes or op-task link changes, that sort of thing, happening right away. Combined Defense of the Arabian Gulf was a MAWG topic that we worked 2 years ago. That was one that comes to mind where the CNAF was so taken with the recommendation that he turned around and went back to the AOC and said, fix this now, just like this, and they did. And so that was really impressive to see how that happens. But we do track throughout the year to make sure that those things are being implemented, and then we will bring those back in an iterative process. We'll bring those back the next year so that the participants at the WEPTAC know that it's not just, you're not just spending a few days in a room coming up with good ideas. These things are being implemented at the highest levels.
All right, thank you. For the sake of time, we have 2 more questions, and I'm going to quickly hit on those. One person asked, if this is so useful, why don't we do it for a year-round kind of scenario? And I think the short answer is it's a very big burden to get everybody TDY, all the smart people, to one location, and we only really want to do that once a year. Additionally, it's a year-long process to filter all those things in through the course of 1 year, and then it takes about a year to really digest some of the ideas that happen. The second question left unanswered had to do with LVC. What is the status of LVC training? So whoever asked that question, that's probably a long answer, and if they want to look me up afterwards in the hallways, I'll be more than happy to answer that. In A3T, we deal a lot with LVC. These guys may not deal with it so much, but it's definitely a